Hello on this Friday. It's 10 Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. I'm Ana Cabrera reporting from New York. We have all the time in the world. That is the new message from the Trump administration on the Iran war. Nearly 8 weeks now into this conflict launched by the U.S. and Israel, a major reversal from President Trump after his initial insistence on a 4 to 6 week timeline. It also marks a stark shift from Trump's tactic of announcing deadline after deadline for Iran with the threat of annihilation behind each one. But a short time ago, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was clear this doesn't mean U.S. operations are any less intense. In fact, it's the opposite, he says. While the ceasefire remains intact, Hegseth says the U.S. blockade on Iran is now expanding and going global, already reaching to the Indian Ocean, thousands of miles from the theater of war. Let's bring in MS Now contributor Inzamam Rashid in Dubai, our White House reporter Jake Traylor, and Colin Clark of the Soufan Center. Jake, what else did we hear from the Defense Secretary this morning?
Yeah, Anna, I think first it's worth noting out to our viewers that the Hegseth once again bypassed some of these veteran defense journalists during this quote-unquote press conference, only calling on, for the most part, these very MAGA-aligned individuals. But what Hegseth did say of substance was that a blockade was essentially going to take as long as it needs to take, essentially echoing President Trump's remarks yesterday. As you noted, this real shift in strategy in conversation where Trump repeatedly has set a deadline, moved the deadline, said it'll be over in a couple days, now saying things that are really just kind of left indefinitely, saying don't rush me, the president said yesterday. He also said that there is no time frame going forward. So Hegseth really was in line with that same thing, saying that this blockade is going to take as long as it needs to take and essentially putting the ball in Iran's court. Hegseth also noted of expanding the active blockade as it is right now. Take a listen to what he said.
Not only is the blockade growing, in fact, a second aircraft carrier will join the blockade in just a few days, but this growing blockade is also gone global. President Trump said it again yesterday. We have all the time in the world, and we're not anxious for a deal. And I hear him say it every day in private as well.
Anna, you heard right there, not anxious for a deal. I think something that potentially maybe is a public negotiating tactic, but as we talk to many Americans across the country, they are quite anxious for a deal to end this war.
Colin, your reaction to this dual track of an intensifying war blockade plus a newly open-ended diplomatic effort?
Well, unfortunately, it's just more poor strategic communications from the administration. Strategic communications mean aligning what we say and what we do. President Trump seems to think it's a novelty that, his contradictions confuse our adversaries, but actually they also confuse our allies, or what allies we'll have left at the end of this conflict. It's really just a haphazard strategy to the extent that there is one, and it shows that really, what the United States is doing tactically, operationally, and strategically can turn on a dime depending on what the president posts on his Truth Social account that day.
Inzamam, this war is in this odd stasis right now, but are things now starting to move toward a second round of talks?
Maybe. This is the conversation that I've been having today with senior officials inside Pakistan's government who say that tonight the foreign minister of Iran will be heading to Islamabad to have conversations directly with the Pakistani Prime Minister and with the Field Marshal, the Chief of the Army, General Asim Munir. And then the Foreign Minister of Iran will go on to Oman and to Moscow as well, a bit of a regional tour. This has been confirmed now by Iranian state TV out here in the region as well. So it looks as if this foreign ministerial trip by the Iranian foreign minister will go ahead this evening. And I think this is interesting because, look, Iran didn't want to come to the table when the US were prepared to go, when J.D. Vance was prepared to fly to Islamabad for a second round of talks. Remember, we were going back and forth to see whether the vice president was going to leave the US and get on a plane, head 16 hours to Pakistan, and whether then, of course, the Iranian delegation would take that short flight over as well. But right now, it seems that Iran are willing to maybe take some small steps to see what the Pakistanis have got to say, to hear what the US have have got to say via Pakistan as well. Inside Islamabad still, Anna, there are a huge number of US security officials there in case that all of a sudden we do potentially see that there could be talks between the two countries, and then we would see that US delegation get on a flight and head to Islamabad. But why is Iran coming to the table right now? Well, I think because of the US blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, they are seeing a huge impact on their economy. You go to the markets inside Tehran, the prices are skyrocketing. Everyday people are hurting as a result of this war inside their country. Pharmaceuticals are charging huge prices for medicines inside Iran as well. And so I think this is causing the regime there to actually try and maybe think about bringing some form of peace and stability for its own people, particularly if they want to remain in charge. They've got to keep the people on side. But we are now in this situation where effectively you can go down the route of diplomacy, have these conversations in Islamabad, or as we heard from Pete Hegseth today, the ramping up of US forces in the region. Iran say that they've got their finger on the trigger as well. So it is a very precarious situation at the minute between diplomacy and potential military action.
As we've touched on, President Trump has shifted the timeline of this war numerous times. He was pressed on that yesterday. Let's watch.
How long are you willing to wait until you get a unified response?
Don't rush me, Jeff. I've been doing this for 6 weeks, and the military is totally defeated. We have no pressure. It's only guys like you with a question like that about what's your time. We've been doing it for 5.5 weeks.
But sir, is your administration 8 weeks that the U.S. now has been involved with Iran? You had initially said it would be 4 to 6 weeks.
Well, I hope that, but I also took a little break.
Jake, these mixed messages have complicated things behind the scenes at the White House, right? Fill us in.
Yeah, I mean, Anna, look, as the president over the past 8 weeks has been inconsistent in messaging, that has taken a real toll on some of the folks inside of the White House. This new reporting, along with some of my colleagues, that White House aides have kind of been left in the wake of some of President Trump's back and forth on the war, and they've been left to try and defend his contrasting remarks. I spoke with one former Trump White House official who said that he's confident after conversations he's had internally with White House folks that about 90% of the stuff coming out of the White House right now from some of these top aides, that they themselves don't believe some of the things they're saying. They are just trying to, in this real moment, appease the president. They're more focused on that than maybe informing the public. Another couple of White House officials I spoke with said that they're frustrated by how many phone conversations the president has had with reporters, because normally in the spirit of transparency, that would be a good thing. But often the president, literally minutes apart, is giving contrasting information that gives White House messaging officials a struggle of how exactly to frame the president's approach here. I spoke to another couple of White House officials who also said that they are trying to shift the message to other things besides the war right now. The problem with that is the things that they want to focus on, especially on heading into the midterms, like affordability, gas prices, grocery prices, all of these things are being negatively impacted by the war. And so it's creating quite the conundrum for folks that are trying to message positively as this war continues on.
What's most revealing about this moment isn't just the shift in strategy, it's the shift in tone. Moving from firm deadlines to "we have all the time in the world" isn't a minor adjustment, it's a complete reframing of expectations. And when that kind of pivot happens without a clear explanation, it raises an obvious question: was there ever a real plan to begin with? Because deadlines, even flexible ones, create accountability. They signal urgency, direction, and intent. But when those deadlines repeatedly disappear, replaced by open-ended language, it starts to feel less like strategy and more like improvisation. Saying there's no rush in the middle of an escalating conflict may be intended to project confidence, but it can just as easily come across as detachment. At the same time, the actions on the ground tell a very different story. Expanding the blockade, deploying more military assets, and widening the geographic scope of operations are not signs of patience, they are signs of escalation. That contradiction between words and actions is where confusion sets in, not just for the public, but for allies and adversaries alike. And confusion in a situation like this isn't harmless. It complicates diplomacy, weakens alliances, and makes it harder to build any kind of coherent path forward. If partners don't fully understand the strategy, or if it seems to change day by day, trust becomes fragile. Even adversaries may miscalculate, increasing the risk of unintended consequences. Meanwhile, there are indications that pressure is working, at least to some extent. Economic strain inside Iran appears to be pushing its leadership toward limited engagement, with regional diplomacy quietly gaining momentum. That suggests leverage exists, but leverage only matters if it's used with clarity and purpose. What makes this even more challenging is the internal dynamic. Reports of officials struggling to keep up with shifting messaging point to a deeper issue. Inconsistency at the top inevitably trickles down. When those responsible for communicating policy don't fully believe or understand it, the entire system starts to feel unstable. Ultimately, this isn't just about whether the war continues or ends, it's about whether there is a coherent strategy guiding it. Right now, the approach seems to rest on a fragile balance, escalate enough to maintain pressure, but not enough to trigger wider conflict, while keeping diplomacy theoretically alive. That might work in the short term,